In the Cydonia region of Mars, there's an extraordinary collection of objects. They are, by our standards, huge. They include a mile-long face. We're exploring the question of whether or not these structures could be artificial. One might ask, isn't it obvious one way or the other? The answer is no for several reasons. First of all, we're dealing with fairly low-resolution imagery. Secondly, the objects are not, other than this humanoid-looking face, are not recognizable by contemporary standards. They don't look like buildings and streets, things that one would expect in a modern technological culture. But yet they seem to possess a certain degree of organization and regularity. And so one's first impression is that there seems to be a pattern of organization here. And there's something faintly familiar about them. We see, in addition to this humanoid form, the face on Mars, these pyramidal structures that seem to have undergone a great deal of degradation over time. And this confounds the whole process. The one approach that we are trying to use, however, is to apply methods that we've developed to study terrestrial satellite imagery and apply the same methods to these images of Mars to see what we get. So we have some basis for comparison.
The probability for these objects being artificial, I think, is quite high because the planet Mars does not appear to be covered with objects like this. So we've looked at a lot of Martian real estate in the last decade in doing this investigation, and there are very few objects that any of us have even speculated might possibly be artificial. It seems to be this one location that is particularly rich in these unusual landforms. That goes back to the issue of context again. Taken individually, these objects are unique in and of themselves, but we have to remember that they're co-located. They're all in the same place, and that makes them that much more unusual.
When I first looked at the material and the first work was done, I thought, and when I wrote my book, that it was still pretty much a 50-50 kind of probability, that perhaps artificial, perhaps natural. But in the last 10 years, with further research that's been done, particularly looking at the fractal analysis and then the more recent mathematical modeling, not of the pyramids per se, but of these unusual little lumps that occur in patterns, I'd say that we're getting more towards a 75–80% probability. If we go there and find, just a pile of rocks and unusual mountains, site of a future golf course and condominiums, will I be heartbroken? No. But I think that the evidence now is beginning to shift.
The geometry found in the mound formation is closely related to architectural geometry known on the Earth and part of a cultural tradition of architectural geometry that goes back many, many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's a geometric embodiment of various symbols or meaningful symbolism about the universe within geometry by expressing it in architecture. And the distribution of these mound formations has that geometry, unmistakably so. There's no doubt about that. And since it does, it suggests a very highly developed, if they're artificial, a very highly developed culture expressing certain symbolisms, certain symbolic ideas, which gives them an abstract intelligence similar to our own, if indeed they were other than us, which they might have been us. But I find this tremendously exciting and intriguing, this particular aspect of it.
There's a psychological barrier you have to go through. I know that when I first began working with this, I kind of had a detached viewpoint. But then once I began to look at Errol Torun's work, I said, well, are you either going to make a kind of a jump into looking at this thing seriously or not? And to do that jump, there was kind of there was inertia, a lot of inertia. And I can understand that planetary scientists would have even much more inertia, because their first reaction is that it's natural, A, and B, there's an enormous amount of peer pressure, okay, not to take this seriously. Whereas that doesn't influence me.
I understand that a lot of this thing is very controversial, but controversy is what makes science, or should make science. If you don't have controversy, then you're just stagnating.
I think in encounter with extraterrestrial, others would force us to rethink most, if not all, the basic questions of human life. Who are we? Where did we come from? Where are we going? These are the questions that children ask us, and we often don't have very good answers to these questions. And maybe it's time to start asking them again.
My view as an archaeologist is, if anybody has ever come through the solar system and built anything, then there will be remains of it, because it works on Earth. Our forebears here on this planet, and no matter how slightly they build, even if they're just hunter-gatherers, and they just camp briefly, we can still find evidence of their brief encampment. So if someone with far more technology came through and built something, well, then we should be able to detect it.
It's a very large universe, and it would be a heck of a waste of a universe if there wasn't other life out there. And probably a lot of it here and there has evolved to spacefaring capability, just as we have. So it seems a reasonable idea to suggest that other civilizations have achieved the capability to explore the galaxy. And when we say the probability is very small of something like the landforms on Mars being artificial, I would have to disagree with that statement. The probability is unknown, which is very different from being small, because for all we know, the whole galaxy has already been explored by intelligent species long ago, and all terrestrial type planets have landforms or artifacts from their explorations on them today.
All the geology that we understand about Mars today has come mainly from the Viking data. And the Cydonia pictures are part of that data. And what I've seen in Cydonia suggests to me that there may have been intelligence on Mars. Therefore, I do not find a contradiction in extending that to saying that the Cydonian hypothesis, which is essentially one that life evolved on Mars, maybe at a different time scale on Earth, but nevertheless evolved to humanoid appearance, is certainly possible. And we may well discover in the future that this was indeed the case, in which case science will have to shift its paradigms, and mankind will have to accept that we were never alone in this solar system. Indeed, there may be an incredible history in this solar system on the other planets. So we have to extend the radio sati concept to searching for artifacts, not only on our moon, but on the other planets as well.
So here we have an array of different scientists, none of them associated with NASA, all of them well qualified in their fields, looking at the object from artistic, sculptural, anthropological, anthropometric, photoclinometry, fractal, all of these methods of analysis applied to the object, any one of which could have said, no, I'm not artificial, none of which have said that yet. They've all said, no, maybe I am artificial. And this is what I meant when I talk about convergence of evidence. It doesn't prove it, but it means this is something we should look at.
Well, the riddle of the Sphinx. The Sphinx was a very fierce sort of dragon entity in the cultures really of ancient Greece and certainly Egypt and other parts of the Middle East. And one of the great tasks of any hero, particularly in the Greek mythology, was to answer the riddle of the Sphinx. And the riddle goes, what is it that in the morning walks on 4 legs, at midday walks on 2, and in the evening walks on 3? And the answer is humanity, people. In Greek, there's a word for a man, which is aner, a word for a woman, which is gune, but a word for humanity, which is anthropos. And that's basically, anthropos is the answer to the riddle in Greek mythology. And at that point, the Sphinx disappears. The Sphinx is vanquished. And in essence, when we look at Mars and we look at these images with a face and pyramids, the same question comes up again. This is a Sphinx. What does it mean? It's the riddle of the Sphinx. Is the answer still really humanity? Because it takes people to look at this and perceive that here's a face and here's pyramids. And so really the riddle of these unusual anomalous features on Mars is really the answer to the riddle, just the fact that we perceive them that way. Is it humanity in that sense? Or is it humanity in the sense that these particular objects were actually made by some intelligent life form to tell us about ourselves? Or in the process of trying to understand them, do we understand ourselves in a completely new and radical way? And does that really cause us then to look at Earth and our particular history as a species in a dramatically different fashion? I think if nothing else, it reunites us as a species and puts us in a quest, really, for what our future is going to be, whether that future will be on Mars or other planets, but most importantly, what our future is going to be on Earth. How are we really going to define ourselves? How will we continue to answer that riddle of the Sphinx? Because really the people who couldn't answer the riddle of the Sphinx in Greek mythology became lunch or sometimes dinner for the Sphinx. And as certainly we still faced a reduced threat from nuclear holocaust, but it's still there. And as time goes on, other technologies will continue to threaten us as a species, because we tend to create things before we're really emotionally ready to use them with wisdom. So this riddle of the Sphinx continues, and the riddle on Mars is perhaps the latest and most challenging riddle right now.